My husband blew our entire $11,000 baby fund at the casino while I was 8 months pregnant and begging him to let me stop standing on my feet all day. Update. I left, and I've never felt more free. I need to preface this by saying I never in a million years thought I'd be posting something like this. I was the kind of person who scrolled past these stories thinking, that could never be me. I'd have seen the signs. Turns out you never see the signs when you're the one living inside the marriage. So here it is, laid out as plainly as I can manage, because writing it down is the only way I've been able to make sense of the last 4 months of my life. I was 8 months pregnant with our first child, working full-time as a receptionist at a veterinary clinic. 9-hour shifts, almost all of it on my feet, checking in nervous dog owners and holding squirming cats while vet techs drew blood. By month 7, my ankles had basically disappeared into my calves. By month 8, my lower back felt like someone had taken a crowbar to it every single night. I was exhausted in a way I didn't know a human body could be exhausted and still function. At my 34-week appointment, my OB flagged my blood pressure. Not dangerously high yet, but high enough that she sat me down and told me, in no uncertain terms, that I needed to stop standing for 9 hours a day. She wrote a note recommending I start my leave 3 weeks early. 3 weeks. That was it. 3 weeks of rest before the baby came, to keep my blood pressure from spiraling into something that could actually hurt either of us. I brought the note home feeling almost relieved, like I finally had permission to stop pushing through the exhaustion. My husband, Derek, read it standing in our kitchen, set it down on the counter, and said the sentence that I don't think I'll ever fully get out of my head. You're not disabled, you're just pregnant. I laughed at first because I genuinely thought he was joking. He wasn't. He doubled down, telling me his mother worked the assembly line at a bottling plant until the day she went into labor with him, and if she could do it, I could too. I pointed out, gently, that his mother had also had 3 miscarriages before he was born, and maybe that wasn't the flex he thought it was. He didn't want to hear it. He told me the money we'd saved was for the baby, not for me to sit at home eating chips and watching Bravo for 3 weeks, which, for the record, is not even a phrase I would use, because I don't watch Bravo. I remember standing in that kitchen with my hand pressed into the small of my back, staring at a man I had been married to for 4 years, wondering when exactly he had started talking to me like I was trying to scam him. I want to be clear that this wasn't totally out of nowhere. Derek had always run tight on money conversations. He grew up with not much, and he carried that into adulthood as this constant low hum of anxiety about spending, which I used to find kind of endearing, honestly. He was the guy who brought his own popcorn into the movies and packed lunches for work every single day. I thought that meant he was responsible. I thought that meant our money was safe. I went back to work the next Monday because I didn't feel like I had another option. I cried in the break room twice that week, which had never happened to me before in my life. I am not a crier. I am a suck-it-up-and-keep-moving person. But my body was just done. My manager, Fred, a genuinely kind man in his 50s who has 3 kids of his own, found me sitting on an overturned bucket in the supply closet trying to catch my breath between clients. He didn't ask a single question. He just told me to go home, clocked me out himself, and told me not to come back until my next appointment. That appointment happened to be 2 days later, and it was not good news. My blood pressure had climbed again. My OB looked at me with this expression I can only describe as barely restrained frustration and told me, flatly, that if I didn't start resting immediately, we were looking at a much scarier conversation about preeclampsia. She used the word now, not soon, now. I drove home that day with my hands shaking on the steering wheel, not from fear about the baby exactly, but because I knew I had to have another conversation with Derek, and I already knew how it would go. Except I never got to have that conversation, because that Saturday, Derek left early to go fishing with his coworker like he did most weekends, and I decided, mostly out of boredom and a nagging unease I couldn't quite name, to log into our joint savings account. We had been putting money into that account religiously since we found out I was pregnant. Every paycheck, a set amount went in, no exceptions, no debate. Baby furniture, hospital costs, the 3 months of reduced income we knew I'd have after birth. It all lived in that account. $11,000, give or take, the last time I'd checked. Which admittedly had been almost 2 months earlier because Derek always said he'd handle the finances, and I, like an idiot, let him. The account had $412 in it. I actually laughed out loud, alone, in my kitchen, because my brain simply refused to process the number as real. I refreshed the page 3 times, like the zeros were going to reappear if I just gave it another second. Then I scrolled through 2 months of transaction history and felt the floor drop out from under me. Cash withdrawal, $300. ATM on Route 9. Cash withdrawal, $500. Same location. Cash withdrawal, $200. Over and over, dozens of times, always round numbers, always cash, always from an ATM I recognized because I'd driven past it 100 times. It sat in the parking lot of the Palisade Grand, the casino, about 20 minutes from our house. I sat at that kitchen table for probably 45 minutes without moving. I wasn't even crying at that point. I was just doing math in my head, trying to figure out how a person quietly withdraws $10,500 over 8 weeks without their pregnant wife noticing. The answer, I realized, was that he'd been counting on exactly that. On me being too tired, too swollen, too consumed with growing an entire human being to check. When Derek got home that evening, smelling like lake water and sunscreen, I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just slid my phone across the table with the transaction history pulled up and watched his face. There's a particular kind of silence that happens when someone gets caught in something they never planned to explain, and I watched it happen in real time on my husband's face. The color draining out, the little muscle twitch in his jaw, the way his eyes went everywhere except mine. He didn't deny it. I'll give him that much. He said he'd had a system, that he'd been so close to winning it all back a few times, that he just needed a little more time and he'd have it back before the baby even came. He said it like it was a business plan instead of a confession. I asked him how long. He admitted it had been going on for almost 4 months. Way longer than the 2 months of withdrawals I could actually see, because apparently the earlier losses had come out of his personal checking, which was somehow supposed to make me feel better. I didn't say much else that night. I went upstairs, sat on the edge of our bed with my hands on my belly, and felt the baby kick, hard, right under my ribs, and something in me just clicked into place. I wasn't sad anymore. I was terrifyingly, completely calm. The next morning, while Derek was in the shower, I packed 2 suitcases, grabbed the folder of important documents I kept in the hall closet, and loaded my car. I left him a note on the kitchen table. Not dramatic, not cruel, just factual. I'm going to my mom's. I need to focus on staying healthy for the baby. Don't call me right now. Then I drove the 40 minutes to my parents' house, with my hazards on half the way because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. My mother took one look at my face when I got out of the car and didn't ask a single question either. She just opened her arms. That's a very specific kind of relief, being met with that instead of 100 questions you don't have the energy to answer yet. Derek called 17 times that first day. 17. I watched the number climb on my phone screen, sitting on my parents' kitchen counter like it was a slot machine of its own, which felt almost darkly funny given the circumstances. The voicemails ran the full emotional gauntlet. The first few apologetic and pleading, the middle ones defensive, a couple toward the end genuinely angry, accusing me of overreacting and abandoning him when he needed support. By that evening, my mom had blocked his number from my phone entirely without even asking me first, which honestly might be one of the kindest things anyone has ever done for me. The next few weeks were a blur of appointments and paperwork and trying to physically recover. At my following OB visit, I finally told my doctor the whole situation, or at least the financial parts, because it felt relevant to why my stress levels were nowhere near where they should have been. She didn't blink, just nodded like she'd heard versions of this story more times than I could imagine, and connected me with the hospital's social worker before I even left the building. Within a week, I had paperwork started for WIC, and a couple of assistance programs I hadn't even known existed, ones that help cover formula, basic groceries, and some of the medical costs that insurance wouldn't touch. I remember feeling a strange mix of gratitude and grief filling out those forms. Grateful the help existed, grieving that I needed it at 8 months pregnant because my husband couldn't stop pulling a slot machine lever. Fred, my manager, found out through the grapevine. Small clinic, everyone talks, and I fully expected some awkward, distant version of pity from him at work. Instead, his wife, Renee, reached out to me directly through Facebook, Messenger of all things. I'd met her maybe twice at clinic holiday parties. She told me she'd heard what happened and wanted to help, no strings attached, and within days she'd dropped off an entire car trunk's worth of baby gear at my parents' house. A crib, a changing table, a bag of newborn clothes, still with tags on, some of them from a baby shower that apparently never got used. She told me flat out that once I went back to work, she'd watch the baby for free for as many hours as I needed while I got back on my feet. I cried harder over that offer than I had over almost anything else in the whole ordeal, because it was just so unexpectedly, uncomplicatedly kind. Derek's mother, Margaret, called about a week and a half after I left. I almost didn't pick up, but some part of me still wanted to hear what she had to say. She started off exactly how I expected, defending her son, saying he'd made a mistake but he loved me, saying marriages go through rough patches and I needed to think about the baby having a father in the house. I let her talk for a minute before I told her, calmly, that the rough patch was $10,500 gone to a casino while I was told I wasn't allowed to stop working despite doctor's orders. There was a long pause on the line. Then she asked, very quietly, how long it had been going on. I told her what Derek had admitted. 4 months, maybe longer. She went silent again, and when she spoke next, her voice had changed completely. She told me she needed to call me back. She called back 2 days later, and this time she wasn't defending him at all. Turns out, in confronting Derek herself, she'd discovered he was also carrying nearly $6,000 in credit card debt he'd hidden from both of us for over half a year, on top of the drained savings account. Margaret actually apologized to me on the phone, genuinely, her voice breaking a little, and told me she was sorry she'd tried to smooth things over before she knew the full picture. I appreciated that more than she probably realized. It's a strange kind of validation, having your mother-in-law essentially confirm that no, you weren't overreacting, it really was that bad. I used what was left of my own individual savings, money I'd had tucked away since before the marriage, thank God I'd never merged everything, to put down a deposit on a small one-bedroom apartment about 10 minutes from my parents' place. It wasn't glamorous, second-hand furniture, a kitchen the size of a closet, but it was mine, and nobody was going to quietly drain it while I wasn't looking. Derek and I met once, briefly and civilly, so I could collect some of my remaining things from the house. He agreed easily, almost too easily, like he was trying to prove something by being cooperative. About 3 weeks before my due date, Derek asked to meet me at a coffee shop. Against my better judgment, I agreed, mostly because I figured we needed to start talking logistics eventually, and I didn't want it to be over text. He showed up looking different somehow, a little thinner, more nervous than I'd ever seen him. He told me he'd been going to Gamblers Anonymous meetings 2 weeks in, and he had a sponsor now, and he wanted us to try again before the baby came. He said all the things you'd expect, that he was a different person now, that 2 weeks had already changed everything, that he loved me and wanted to raise our daughter together under one roof. I sat there and let him finish. And then I told him I was proud of him for getting help, genuinely, because I do believe people can change, and I do hope he keeps going to those meetings. But I told him 2 weeks wasn't a marriage repaired, it was a start, and it didn't erase 8 weeks of being told my exhaustion and my doctor's medical advice meant nothing next to a slot machine. I told him I wanted to keep things about our daughter separate from any conversation about reconciliation, and that going forward, anything about custody or support needed to go through lawyers instead of coffee shop conversations. He got quiet, then visibly angry, said something about how I was punishing him for trying, and left before his coffee was even finished. I sat there by myself for another 20 minutes, watching the ice melt in his abandoned cup, feeling oddly peaceful. I went into labor at 3 a.m, 17 days later. My mother drove me to the hospital while my dad stayed home pacing, apparently, according to my mom's texts, throughout the day. Labor was long, almost 14 hours, and at one point during transition, I remember genuinely wondering if I had the strength left to keep going. But at 6:47 that evening, I heard my daughter cry for the first time, and every single thing that had happened over the previous months felt, for one suspended moment, very far away. My mom never left my side the entire time. She held my hand through every contraction and cut nothing short, not even to eat, until the whole thing was over. I named my daughter after nobody in particular, which felt right. A fresh name for a fresh start that had nothing to do with anyone who'd let either of us down. The legal side moved slower than the emotional side, the way it always does. I filed for legal separation with an eye toward divorce and requested child support through the court. When Derek's finances got pulled for the filing, it came out that he was carrying debts to 3 separate casinos, not just the one near our house. Apparently, he'd been rotating locations for a while, maybe trying to avoid being flagged, maybe just chasing bigger comps. I honestly don't know, and I've stopped trying to psychoanalyze it. The court set a mandatory monthly support amount based on his income, garnished directly from his paycheck, so there was no room for forgetting or having a rough month. Derek gets supervised visitation every Sunday afternoon at my parents' house, which was actually his suggestion and one I agreed to. Because whatever his failures as a husband, I don't think it's fair to punish our daughter by cutting him out entirely. At least, not yet. Not while he's still showing up and still going to his meetings, as far as I know. Every visit, without fail, he finds some way to bring up counseling, or getting back together, or how much he's changed. Every time, I redirect it back to her. How she's eating, whether she's hit her 2-month checkup milestones, what he can bring for her instead of what he wants to say to me. I've gotten pretty good at that redirection. It's become almost automatic at this point. It's been 3 months since she was born. I went back to work part-time 2 weeks ago, mornings only, and Renee has been exactly as good as her word. She shows up at 8 sharp every day I work, And honestly, I think she might love my daughter almost as much as I do at this point, judging by how many photos she sends me on my lunch break. My savings account is sitting at zero, technically, if you don't count the little bit I've managed to sock away in these last few weeks, which feels almost funny. Starting over from nothing at 31 years old with a newborn. Except it doesn't feel funny at all. It feels like the first honest number I've seen in a bank account in almost a year. I know exactly where every dollar of it is going, and nobody is going to quietly siphon it out from under me while I'm too tired to check. I won't pretend this has been easy, or that I have some tidy, triumphant bow to put on it. There are nights I'm still angry, and nights I still cry, mostly out of exhaustion, mostly at 2 a.m. during a feeding when my brain has nothing better to do than replay that spreadsheet of ADM withdrawals. But there are also mornings, like this one, where I'm sitting on my parents' back porch with my daughter asleep on my chest, coffee going cold beside me, genuinely at peace in a way I don't think I ever fully was, even before any of this happened. I have my mom 15 minutes away, I have a manager's wife who treats my daughter like her own grandchild, and I have a tiny apartment that is entirely, unambiguously mine. I used to think losing that $11,000 was the worst thing that happened to me this year. I don't think that anymore. I think it might genuinely be the thing that saved me.